Hare Krishna. So, we continue our discussion on from Dharma to Prema. The topic which I am going to discuss is Karma, Dharma and Daiva. So, Karma has many meanings, but one of the meanings here is action. Dharma is our duty in this context, and Daiva is destiny. So, how do these factors relate with each other? Many people, especially Western observers or Western critics of Indian religions, they are Indian thoughts in general, they say that Indians are fatalistic. Now, fatalism is, just like there are many isms, so fatalism is one ism. You can go ahead. So, fatalism basically means that accepting fate to be supreme. That means fate has organized, has decided everything, and there is nothing in our hands. And those who accept fate as supreme, they, at least according to Western schools of thought, they are very passive. They don't work, they don't strive. And because of which, they can't progress. And that's why they are overpowered. So, is the now Indian thought system, there have been many thought systems in India, but the Bhakti wisdom, if we see, it is not at all fatalistic. So fatalism means, we may say that, some people say, "Meri kismat hi phooti hai." You know, my destiny is rotten. So because of which everything goes wrong in my life and I can't do anything about it. But that is not the Vedic understanding at all. So we will look at one incident from the Ramayana, that wherein also the same discussion comes up about what is beyond our hands and what is in our hands and how we should act. So we know that after Kaikeyi's mind was poisoned by Manthara, then Kaikeyi demanded from Dashrath that send Ram to the forest for 14 years and have my son Bharata installed as the king. Dashrath was devastated. And he begged to Kaikeyi. He says, if you feel I have slighted you, if I feel I have slighted Bharata by appointing Ram as the next king, I'll have Bharata appointed as the king. But don't send Ram to the forest. I cannot live without him. He says, the world may be able to exist without the sun. The crops may be able to grow without rains. But Dashrath will not be able to live without Ram. So please, for the sake of my own life, don't let Ram go. Don't ask Ram to go to the forest. Dashrath actually pleaded so much. He fell at the feet of Kaikeyi and he touched her feet, grabbed her feet, begged her. But at that time, Kaikeyi's mind had been completely poisoned. And Manthara had told Kaikeyi that, if Ram stays in the kingdom, because Ram is so popular, all the courtiers and all the citizens will just support Ram. And even if Bharat is appointed as the king, Bharat will never be able to get popular support of the public. So it is only if Ram is out of the picture, then Bharat can grant favors and win over the hearts of people. And 14 years is the minimum time needed that Bharat will take to undo the spell that Ram has cast on the people. This was her way of looking at things. So Kaikeyi was utterly ruthless, and Dashrath had to acquiesce because he was bound by his word of honor. We'll talk about this word of honor in one of our future talks. But suffice it to say that when he called Ram, and Ram accepted this very gracefully. In fact, Ram's response was so heartrending. He said that it's just small. He turned towards Kaikeyi when Dashrath could not even speak what was to be spoken. Then Kaikeyi spoke on his behalf. And she told him that about the two hours. Then Ram just folded his hands and he told Kaikeyi, till now I thought that you had, except you treated me like your own son. That you treated me just as the way you treated Bharat. But today I recognized, to my sadness, that you never treated me like Bharat. For if you had treated me like your own son, you would not even have needed to go to our father to ask for this. You could have told me that to go to the forest and I would have gone myself. Now when Dashrath heard this, his heart was even more broken. But even that did not affect Kaikeyi. And then finally, Ram came out. Ram told his father that I will prepare for departure. And in the meanwhile, the news had started spreading. So as he decided first to go to, he had come in the royal chariot, but when he went out of the palace, he went out on foot. As he was going along, he was joined by Lakshman. And Lakshman also come to know about this. And then Lakshman, as he was going along, they went first to the palace of Kaushalya. And Kaushalya had been fasting that night to invoke blessings, fasting and praying, to invoke blessings for Ram when he was going to be coronated as the Prince Regent the next day. And although Ram was extremely sober, still a mother could immediately see that there's something very seriously wrong. And she asked, Ram, why is your face pale? What has happened? And then Ram told his mother. He tried to keep as calm as possible. He says, a great adversity has befallen us and I will have to go to the forest. And Kaushalya was shattered. She said, alas, for so many years, I never had a child. And because of that, I was grief-struck. And to add to my grief, although I was the senior-most queen, still the king always favored Kaikeyi. I tolerated it all these days. You, when you were born, you were the greatest joy of my life. And today, by sending you to the forest, not only is Kaikeyi causing you suffering, she is causing me even greater suffering. So Kaikeyi said that, for a son, it is equally important to obey not just his father, but also his mother. I forbid you from going to the forest. So you have to obey your mother also. So Ram understood the feelings of his mother. And he folded his hand and he says, yes, oh mother, it is not my desire to cause grief to you. But I could see from my father's face that he did not want to do this. He was bound by his woe. Against his own will, he was doing this. We cannot cause him more grief by disobeying him now. Then Kaushalya said that, oh Ram, if you are going to go to the forest, I cannot live with you. I will also come with you to the forest. And all this time, Lakshman was observing, and Lakshman was bursting with anger. He was all controlling himself. And then finally, Ram said, actually, he said, this is the time when our father needs you the most, he says. No, he is shattered by the way he has seen Kaikeyi turn against him. So at this time, if you also reject him and go away, he will not be able to survive. Oh mother, I will go to the forest. And consoling, he said, 14 years will just pass like 14 days. And before you know, I will be back here. But in the meanwhile, you should be by our father. And Ram spoke so peacefully. Actually, rather than letting Kaushalya see Dashrath as an unjust king who had done atrocity, he made Kaushalya into a partner, an assistant for Dashrath. That what he is doing, it is not that he wanted to do it. And he is suffering. You need to be there with her. And he said, with your blessings, I would like to go and I will come back soon. And Kaushalya realized that Ram was very firm in his words. And she finally, still crying, she agreed. And she said, as the Ram took his leave, they came out of Kaushalya's palace, and at that time, Lakshman exploded. He said, how dare you tolerate this great injustice? He says, the kingdom belongs to you, and you are entitled to get it. How can anyone take this kingdom away from you? before Ram could reply, he said that actually if anyone tries to stop the kingdom, they should be punished. Not that for no fault of yours, you should have to go to the forest. Actually, being exiled is a very serious level of punishment. Now, later on, when Bharat comes back to the kingdom, and when he hears from Kaikeyi, Kaikeyi actually tells him very gleefully that Ram has been exiled. And she has no idea of the extent of love that is there between the brothers. But at that time, Bharat says that actually exile is just the second last before the worst level of punishment. The highest punishment for a wrongdoer is execution. Just one level before execution is exile. So to have someone exiled, it means that person is either has either done a very terrible crime, or it's a very excessive punishment for whatever reason. And Ram had done no crime at all. So when he started speaking, I said, you should not accept this. You should fight against this, Lakshman said. So at that time, Ram told him that actually there is no way that my father would ever have sent me on exile. What to speak of my father sending me on exile like this? There is no way that Kaikeyi could have spoken such harsh words which forced my father to send me on exile. Today when I heard Kaikeyi speak those words, I understood that this must be the will of destiny. Don't you remember how much Kaikeyi loved me? And indeed, her love for all of us. Now, there are three mothers, but they treated their sons like each other. No, all of them were their sons. You see? That her love for me was just like the flow of the Ganga. Lakshman was still angry. He says, that's what I can't understand. How in one night the whole Ganga has dried up. So then Ram comes back to his same point. And he says that's why. He says, when I heard Kaikeyi speak those words, there is no way such a thing could have happened. Such a change could not have happened in her disposition unless it had been the will of destiny. And therefore I have accepted it. So Lakshman is still seething with anger. He says it is only cowards who accept injustice as destiny and passively let themselves suffer. He says courageous people fight against injustice. They don't accept injustice as destiny. And Ram still says calm. And he says, for me, I am going to the forest not because it is the will of destiny. I am going it because it is my father's instruction. And to follow him is my duty. And Lakshman is still not satisfied. He says, actually, what kind of father will send his innocent son to the forest for no fault of his? He says, the king, he does not even refer to Dasharatha as his father now. He's so angry. He says, the king has become blinded by lust. Now, the beauty of his youngest queen has blinded the king, and that's why he has become a puppet in her hands. And there is no need to follow a king who has lost the sense of right or wrong. Therefore, you have no obligation, no duty to Dasharatha to go to the forest. So Ram says, my duty as a son is not to question the intent of my father. It is to follow his instruction. I can see, again, Ram makes the same point. Ram is so sensitive, so empathic in seeing from others' perspective. He says, the Lakshman, you should not even think such words about our father. He is sending me to the forest even against his will, at the cost of great pain to himself. To accuse him that he is blinded by lust is not only terribly wrong for a son to do towards his father, but it is also wrong. The king is sending me to the forest because he is bound by his words to do so. Lakshman says, there is no need for you to go to the forest. You are meant to be the king. And if anybody stops you from being the king, I will fight against them. whoever tomorrow morning will be your coronation, and whoever stops it, they will go to Yama's abode by the arrows of my bow. Indeed, even if the king comes in between, then he will have to go to Yama's abode. Rama also becomes very grave and he says, "Oh Lakshman, before your arrows can touch our father, they will have to go through my chest." When Lakshman hears this, he sobers down. Then Ram says that, "Oh Lakshman, in all situations, what is important for us is to decide what is our duty. And for me, my duty is clear. I have to obey my father so that his honor is protected. He, although he loves me, although he does not want me to go to the forest, still, because he had given the word of honor, he has, at the cost of great pain to himself, decided to honor the word that he gave to Kaikeyi. And for me to honor his word, that is most important. And therefore I will go to the forest." Then Lakshman realizes he is not going to win this argument. Then he makes another argument. Then that's of course a different discussion. He says, "If you are going to go to the forest, I will go with you." So that, of course, then Ram also says, "Don't go." But then they have a nice discussion. Finally, Lakshman loses one argument, but he makes sure that he wins the second argument. So he makes sure that he goes with Ram. But suffice it to say here that this tension between accepting something as the will of destiny and doing something to change the situation, this is an enduring tension which is there always in our scriptures. And Ram could be said to be fatalistic, say. That he was actually, he just passively accepted whatever happened. But if we see, was Ram fatalistic? Now when Sita was kidnapped, Ram did not say, "Oh, it was the will of destiny that Sita was to be kidnapped. Let me accept it." Isn't it? So, what did he do? Because his focus was on, what is my duty? What is my dharma? So, when he was exiled, he focused, my dharma is to obey my father. But when Sita was abducted, he did not think what is the will of destiny. He focused on what is my duty. And he recognized that my duty is, I have to protect my wife. She has been abducted and I have to rescue her. And if he had been fatalistic, sometimes we don't want to do something and we say this is the will of destiny. So if he had that kind of attitude, he could have very easily justified. He could have said, actually, I'm in the forest, I'm alone, I don't have any resources, I don't have any kingdom. Even I have to hire soldiers, I don't have any resources, money to hire the soldiers. I don't even know where Ravana has gone. And Ravana is a person who has defeated even the gods. How can I be expected to fight against them? So he could have had so many rationalizations for not doing anything about Sita's abduction. But he did not accept any of those rationalizations. So in this case, he fought. So the focus in the Vedic literature, in the Bhakti tradition, is on doing our duty. And while doing our duty, if we are tempted away from duty, then we talk about destiny so that we can stick to duty. That will be illustrated in the next example. Go ahead. Yeah, this is quite a striking example. In the 10th canto, when Vasudeva is going along, actually, Kamsa is taking Vasudeva and Devaki in their chariot. So here what is it? Vasudeva tells to Kamsa that many arguments he gives. One of the arguments is, if your death is destined, what will killing Devaki achieve? He tries various arguments, and when he doesn't listen to that, finally this is the argument he uses. That if your death is destined, you may kill Devaki, but the destiny is going to come and you're going to die eventually. So, but the same Vasudeva doesn't think that, if Devaki's death is destined, what am I doing arguing with him so much? Isn't it? So why not? No, if something is destined, well, if Kamsa's death can be destined, then even Devaki's death can also be destined. So why does he use the argument in that way and not this way? That's because the focus is on duty. For him, as a husband, it is his duty to protect his wife. And he will use whatever resources are possible. So Kamsa was militarily more powerful than Vasudeva. And also at that time, it was Kamsa's territory. Normally, the marriage happens where the bride stays, and then the bride and the bridegroom go to the groom's place. So they were at that time in Kamsa's territory, basically. So because of that, Vasudeva did not want to fight violently. He would not have been able to be a match to Kamsa, but even if he could have been a match, still there would have been too much adverse odds against him. So he did not try to combat him militarily, but he used arguments. And one of the arguments he used is this, that if your death is destined, what will you achieve by killing Devaki? So, but he doesn't turn that argument around and think about it himself, because he is not concerned whether Devaki's death is destined or not. He is concerned about what is my duty. That means the Vedic culture is primarily duty-centered. It is not destiny-centered. Duty-centered means the whole focus is on understanding what is our duty and doing that duty. And while doing our duty, there are two possibilities. One is either there is a temptation that by giving up duty, we might gain something more. Then such temptation should be resisted. So for Kamsa, he talked about destiny because Kamsa was about to give up his duty. How was Kamsa giving up his duty? He was the brother. Now, brother is supposed to protect his sister. Actually, there was 3 levels at which Kamsa was giving up his duty. It was, first is, for a Kshatriya, he should be protecting citizens and especially women. Secondly, it was not just a Kshatriya protecting a woman. The woman in question was his own brother. Of course, Kamsa and Devaki were cousins, not exactly brother-sister, but still, she was like a sister for him. And thirdly, it was her day of marriage. It's on a happy occasion, on a sacred occasion, to cause distress, to cause bloodshed, that is actually very severely wrong. So, Kamsa, being allured by the hope of protecting his life, he was giving up his duty as a brother, he was giving up his duty as a Kshatriya, and he was giving up his duty as a king who was supposed to be dharmic and to observe the sanctity of dharmic ceremonies. So when he was, because of temptation, giving up duty, at that time Vasudeva, in order to prompt him to stick to duty, he reminded him that there is destiny. You will not be able to avoid destiny by acting so wrongly, so viciously. Therefore, the focus is on duty. And if knowledge of destiny can inspire us to do our duty, then we invoke destiny. But if knowledge of destiny we invoke to rationalize that I have no need to do my duty, then that is a misunderstanding. That we'll see in the next example. Yeah. So now here when we talk about, the topic was karma, dharma and daiva. So the word karma itself has many meanings. Just like dharma has many meanings. So karma broadly has 4 meanings. The first meaning of karma is the action, what we do. So we should choose our karma properly. That is action. But the word karma also means reaction. We are all suffering the results of our own karma. Here when we use the word karma, we are referring to the reaction for our karma. Thirdly, we also use the word karma sometimes to refer to the system of action-reaction. That actually the law of karma is infallible. The law of karma is inescapable. So here what we are referring to karma, it's neither action nor reaction, it is the system of action-reaction. And fourthly, the word karma also means one kind of karma. There is karma, there is vikarma, and is akarma. So karma is right action, vikarma is wrong action, and akarma is transcendental action. It is action that brings no reaction. So then karma is also one kind of action, it's pious action. So the word karma has many meanings in that sense. So karma as reaction is not so much in our control. Now that is something which is already fixed. So when we talk about destiny, what exactly do we mean when it is said there is a will of destiny? So is destiny a person who has a will? Is destiny Krishna himself? Or what exactly is destiny? So in the Mahabharata, Krishna is not referred to as destiny. Krishna is referred to as the Lord of Destiny. As the Lord of Destiny. In the Kurukshetra war, on the 10th day, when Bhishma falls, at that time, Karna had taken a vow that as long as Bhishma is fighting, I will not join the war. So the day Bhishma falls, the next day Karna enters into the battlefield. And Bhishma has been the commander. So now that Bhishma has fallen, another commander has to be chosen. So when the second commander has to be chosen, Duryodhana immediately goes to Karna and tells him, "Oh Karna, please command my army and lead us to victory." So Karna becomes very grave and he says, "Oh Duryodhana, there are many who because of my birth do not accept me as a hero. And therefore your making me the commander will not be appropriate. Moreover," he says, "Drona is your teacher. In his presence, for you to appoint someone else as the kingdom, he will be very slighted. And he has, putting aside his affection for the Pandavas, fought vigorously for you. Therefore, you go and ask him to be your king." Now, Duryodhana also has this same thoughts going on in his mind. But he is caught between between solidifying his friendship with Karna and between continuing to gain the loyalty of Drona. So Duryodhana, actually when he starts off also, when he goes to Karna, Duryodhana is a very good reader of people. But he's a very bad reader of dharma. So he will read people well and he could understand. So he actually knows that Karna is not going to not accept the commandership. And still he goes to Karna just to endear himself to him. That Duryodhana offered me the commandership. Then he goes to Drona. Now, meanwhile, Drona has also been thinking. And Drona, he has been burdened by the thought that now he will have to fight in Duryodhana's army under the commandership of Karna. So he was not at all happy with that thought. So when Duryodhana comes and offers Drona the commandership, Drona is very pleased. And he says, "Oh Prince, you have bestowed a great honor on me and I am pleased with you. I would like to offer you some benediction. What would you like to have?" So he says, Duryodhana also knows that Drona will be pleased that he will ask something. So he already prepared himself. So he says, "Oh Acharya, if you'd like to do something for me, then please arrange to have Yudhishthir arrested alive and brought in front of me, imprisoned." So Drona smiles and he says, "Yudhishthir is such an ajata shatru. Yudhishthir is such a well-wisher of everyone that even you do not want him to be killed. You want him alive." So Duryodhana smiles viciously and he says, "No, actually, if we kill Yudhishthir, Bhima and Arjuna will go mad. And they will destroy our entire army and nothing will be able to protect us. My plan is that after Yudhishthir is arrested, I will have him play another gambling match with Shakuni. And I will defeat him and send him to the exile again." So when Drona hears this, he realizes that Duryodhana is never going to be redeemed. But then he tells, Dronacharya says to Duryodhana that actually, he says, "I will strive my very best to have Yudhishthira arrested. But you have to do something for me." He says that Arjuna, although he is my student, he was such a dear student that I have imparted all my knowledge to him. And thereafter, he has performed austerities, ascended to the heavens, and got many celestial weapons. Therefore, if Arjuna comes between me and Yudhishthir, I will not be able to arrest him. So get Arjuna out of the way, and Yudhishthir will be yours. So now this conversation happens in public. So in the war field itself, just before the war is about to start, on the 11th day. So at that time, there is a Trigarta king Susharman. Trigarta is a kingdom, and their king is Susharman. Susharman says, Arjuna has long antagonized us till now. So he says, I and my whole army, all my brothers, all my cousins, all of us, we will challenge Arjuna. And we will sidetrack him. And Dronacharya can capture Yudhishthir. He says, we will either kill Arjuna or we will die. But we will keep challenging Arjuna till our death. So Duryodhana becomes very happy when he hears this. He says, now whole plan is working. He starts thinking. And then, that's how actually, on the 13th day, when they form a Chakravyuha, at that time Arjuna has been challenged and drawn aside by Susharman. Of course, this is the 11th day. And on the 11th day, Duryodhana's plan works properly. Arjuna is sidetracked. And Dronacharya attacks fiercely. And twice, he just targets Yudhishthira. Bhima and Drishtadyumna, and they all come in between, but nobody can stop Dronacharya. And once Yudhishthira's chariot is destroyed, his armor is destroyed, and Yudhishthira practically has to get off his chariot and go to Sahadev's chariot and flee from there. And somehow, by the very barest of escapes he has. And second time, it happens, so when this sound goes, a very fierce fight happens. Yudhishthira also is not a poor warrior, but just when compared to Dronacharya, he is no match. So when their fight becomes very fierce, at that time, Bhima realizes that although he is powerful, he is no match to Drona. Bhima, whenever he sees other warriors fighting with bow and arrow, and he sees he is not a match to them, he just puts aside his bow and arrow and just charges in. So, just charges into the enemy camp. But this time he realizes Dronacharya is attacking so fiercely that he blows his pounder, his huge conch. And when Arjuna hears this, Arjuna makes short work of Susharman, and he stuns him, and he comes back. And just as Drona is about to capture Yudhishthir, Arjuna charges him. And Yudhishthir is saved. So the 11th day goes in vain. Yudhishthir is not arrested. 12th day also goes in vain. And then finally, when 12th day also nothing happens, and in the meanwhile, Arjuna is steadily destroying the Trigarta forces. So 12th day turns out to be quite a reversal for the Kauravas. Yudhishthira is also not arrested, and Arjuna is slaughtering the Trigartas. So that evening, Duryodhana comes, and he's seething with anger. And he says to Dronacharya, "Oh Acharya, I've tried to please you in all the ways that I can. But," he says that, "still, although you are on my side, you bear affection for the Pandavas. And therefore, you do not fight wholeheartedly. Oh Acharya, if you have too attached to the Pandavas and you are not ready to fight, then please step aside. Let Karna become the commander, and he has promised that one day he will destroy the Pandavas." Now, Dronacharya is so angry. It's like, it's one thing to say that you're not fighting wholeheartedly. It's quite another thing to say, you step aside, somebody else will do your job much better. Nowadays we have, in the cricket team, there's one captain, and anytime the team doesn't do well, the people call for the captain's head. And they say, if somebody else had been the captain, things would have been so much better. So it's one thing for general newspaper people to say that. But if the selection committee head only goes and says like this to the captain, it's very mortifying. So Drona is angry. Still somehow he controls himself. He says, "Oh Duryodhana, you are petty. You are foolish. You are vicious. Because of your selfishness and envy, you rile against those who are working for your cause. He says, can't you see? My body is pierced with the wounds from Arjuna's Gandiva. When faced with Arjuna's prowess, what do you think that son of Suta can do anymore? So Drona is so angry. At that time, Duryodhana realized, hey, wrong tack. He doesn't want Drona. He doesn't want Drona to abandon the fight. He says, oh, Acharya, please forgive me for my strong words. I am distressed because my army is being routed. I know that you are the most competent commander for my army. But please, I have come to you. Protect my army. Otherwise, Arjuna will destroy us. You had promised that you will arrest Yudhishthira. And 2 whole days have passed. I have offered my whole army to you. And yet, Yudhishthira has not been arrested. Drona shakes his head wearily. And he says, no, we humans can only endeavor. But the results are determined by destiny. And, oh Duryodhana, when will you understand that the Lord of Destiny is sitting on the chariot of Partha? Therefore, whatever we do, we are not going to succeed. There are 2-3 occasions in the Mahabharata when Duryodhana becomes sober. He becomes on the 8th day, on the 7th day, I think 7th or 8th days, when again he faces a very severe reversal. So that night he goes to Bhishma and he asks Bhishma, how is it that we have such great warriors and still we are not winning the war? Instead we are losing. So at that time, Bhishma also says the same thing. Oh Duryodhana, I have cried myself hoarse, speaking the same thing to you for your own good again and again. Yet you are not understood. But today I will speak again. He says, Krishna is the Supreme Lord. And whoever side he is on, that side will be victorious. Even if you have all the gods on your side in your army, still as long as Madhava is on the side of Pandava, you will not be victorious. So when Duryodhana hears this, because that day he has faced a severe reversal, that day he had a fierce fight with Bhima and Duryodhana barely escapes with his life. So he's mortified. He says, please tell me more about Krishna. And he hears about Krishna and Bhishma speaks. Bhishma thinks it's a good opportunity to glorify Krishna. And he speaks about all the glories, how Krishna lifted Govardhan hill, how Krishna killed Bakasur, Aghasur. That were all the places where the Mahabharata talks about Krishna's pastimes. In the Mahabharata, it doesn't talk so much about Krishna directly. Mahabharata is focused on Pandavas. But here, few times it talks like this. Then that night, when Duryodhana is about to go to sleep, he's thinking about Krishna. And if he experiences a strange kind of peace that he has not experienced for a long time. The thinking about Krishna, whoever thinks about him, they experience peace by that. And then as he is about to go to sleep, he thinks about Krishna. Maybe if Krishna is God, there is no harm in bowing down to him. And he bows down to Krishna and then goes to sleep. But by the next morning when he wakes up, again all his envy and selfishness has all come up to the fore. The point for our discussion is that Duryodhana never gets the point, but Dronacharya tells him that Krishna is the Lord of Destiny. So Krishna is not destiny, he is the Lord of Destiny. By destiny, what do we mean? Destiny is actually the word that is used to refer to the system of material nature by which we get the reactions to our actions. That means we do certain actions, and after we do those actions get accumulated as a reservoir. And then that reservoir, it comes upon us at particular times. So that's a reservoir of our past karma's reactions. That reservoir is called as destiny. So in that sense, karma, if we consider in the second term as reaction, if you use the word karma as reaction, that is the same as destiny. I mean, if somebody says, oh, my destiny is rotten, that simply means that we ourselves have done certain bad things in the past, because of which that inimical destiny is there for us. And understanding that destiny is not arbitrary. Destiny is not created by some evil god, some evil being. Destiny is a result of our own actions in the past. That knowledge is actually empowering. How that is, we will discuss. Next line. So one thing very important about understanding destiny is never we should use karma to blame the victim. That means when, as I said, when Sita is kidnapped, Ram doesn't think it's her destiny, and Ram certainly doesn't ever raise the question that what karma she must have done because of which she got this. That by her own karma that she was destined like this. No. Why should not, whatever reactions come upon us, we can say at one level they are because of our own karma. But here also we have to recognize that there is no meaning for any system of justice and administration left if those who are meant to be protectors, they start resorting to the idea of karma and destiny. Suppose, say, a thief comes and robs somebody's house, and they go to the king. I say, I've been robbed. The king says, it is your destiny. Now, what is the duty of a king then? The duty of a king, shatatrayate iti kshatriya. If the duty of a king is to protect people from being hurt, kshata means hurt. So kshatrayate, those who protect people from being hurt, those are kshatriyas. So if all the hurts for everyone are coming by their own past karma, then what is the duty for kshatriya? So the point is, when we are living in this world, in this life, we are not meant to judge people for their past life's actions. We are not meant to judge people for their past life actions. If a person has earned his or her own hard-earned money and somebody has stolen it, the king is not to think about what somebody may have done in the past life. The king is, from this life's perspective, this is unjust and it needs to be corrected. So when somebody is victimized by a wrong, we should not be thinking what is their karma. We should be thinking of what is my dharma. What is my duty in this situation? The king should be focused on what is my duty. So when I say what is their karma and what is my dharma, here we are using the word karma in the sense of karmic reactions. We shouldn't be thinking at all about that. Our focus should be primarily on what is my duty, what is my dharma right now. Otherwise, if we start thinking in terms of everything in terms of past karma, then we can become totally heartless. Say, a newborn infant is crying. Naturally, what should the mother? The mother should pick up the child, caress the child, fondle the child, and pacify it. But the mother says, it's by his karma he's crying. It would be utterly heartless. It will not be completely against the nature of a mother's love for a child. So, if we start in our day-to-day dealings to bring in past life karma, then all duty and all love will become meaningless, will become null and void. And this is actually a misunderstanding which is sometimes perpetuated by those who want to label Vedic culture as bad. The idea is that, yes, people may have done certain karma in their past lives, because of which they may get certain reactions. But our point is not to judge people for their past actions. Our focus is on what is the right thing for me to do. And we act accordingly. And we see this time and time again in the scriptures. When in the 4th canto, Prithu Maharaj as a king is told by his citizens that we are starving, there is a great famine in the kingdom. Please help us. Prithu Maharaj doesn't say that, it's all by your karma that you got this. No, he doesn't say that. He immediately works to provide food for them. So the Vedic culture, there is an understanding that sometimes, even after doing our best efforts, we may not get a particular result. Then we understand this is the will of destiny. So sometimes we may strive very hard, strive repeatedly for doing something, and despite doing it repeatedly, things don't work out. So after we have done our karma, if the result don't come out, then we understand that this is the will of destiny. But if we don't do our karma only, if we don't do our duty and say that this is the will of destiny, then we are rationalizing our own irresponsibility. Go ahead. So there are broadly 2 schools of thought. There is karmavad and there is daivavad. So Karmavad is the idea that everything is in my hands. And that is the current idea. Modern mentality is like, modern Western mentality like that. Everything is in my hands. By the sweat of my brow, by the brilliance of my brain, I have achieved this, I have achieved that. And yes, certainly our sweat, our intelligence, they're all important. But if we introspect, we'll find that our hard work alone does not determine the result. Our hard work is important, but so many other factors have to work out right by which we get the result. So Karmavad is the idea that everything is in my hands. And Daivavad is the other extreme, which says that, yeah, go ahead, that nothing is in my hands. Go ahead. Yeah. So now, Karmavad can lead to arrogance and Daivavad can lead to apathy. You can say a person just does nothing, becomes lazy, becomes lethargic, becomes apathetic, think that nothing is in my hands. Now neither of these are true. See, if we consider pendulum, Karmavad is one extreme of the pendulum where we think that everything is in our own hands. And Daivavad is the other extreme of the pendulum where we think that nothing is in my hands. The proper understanding is, go ahead, okay, stay back only. Okay, go ahead, I'll explain afterwards. Go ahead. So, actually, we make our destiny by our karma, by our actions. So in the Mahabharata, going back again to the Mahabharata, at one time, Vidura is strongly chiding Dhritarashtra, telling him that you should stop Duryodhana from his stubborn obstinacy, because of which he wants to fight this war with the Pandavas. If he fights this war, then the whole Kuru dynasty will be destroyed. So at that time, Dhritarashtra tries to rationalize his passivity by saying that, oh Vidura, if it is the will of Almighty Destiny that our dynasty be destroyed, then who am I, a tiny mortal, to stop the will of Almighty Destiny? This is his almighty illusion. He's thinking like that. And Vidura cuts through his illusion. Vidura tells, destiny determines the consequences of our actions, not our actions themselves. Destiny determines the consequences of our actions, not our actions themselves. Now I come to give a class and I am not prepared at all. I just blabber and speak something and I say, that was the destiny. That was not destiny. If sometime I may come well prepared for a class and I may forget something, forget important thing, that we can say is destiny. But if I don't prepare at all, then I cannot blame destiny. That is my responsibility. So the destiny determines the consequences of our actions. Destiny doesn't determine our actions. We have the capacity to choose our actions. And to be responsible means to choose our actions wisely. So, Vidura is telling Dhritarashtra that yes, it may well be that by destiny's will, this war is going to take place and the Kuru dynasty will be destroyed. But the important thing is not what is destiny's will. The important thing is what is your duty. As the ruling head of the Kuru dynasty, it is your duty to do everything that in your power to stop the war. And if you do it, then you will not be culpable, even whatever the results come afterwards. So to understand this, an example is given in the Puranas, how the three things play. There is karma and daiva. There is karma, daiva, kala and phala. All these, so karma plus daiva plus kala, it gives phala. So karma, daiva and kala, when all these three come together, karma plus daiva plus kala, that gives phala. Phala is the fruit. A simple example to illustrate this, say an agrarian example. Now, a farmer plows the land and sows the seed. That is the karma. Then after that rains come. Appropriate quantity at the right time. That is the daiva. Then by the rains, the crops grow and eventually after a few months pass, the harvesting season comes and then the farmer gets the phala. So phala is a result of karma karma, daiva, kala. All three when they come together, karma plus daiva plus kala, that gives phala. So, say a student is studying for exams. So, studying diligently is the karma. Then, the daiva, or say some parents want to have a child. So, then they have to do their part, and then sometimes by the will of destiny, the pregnancy conception occurs, and then after also several months have to pass, kala, and then the phala, then a child is born. So, in all activities, if we see, there is the human element and there is the element which is beyond human power. That is broadly called as daiva. And even when karma and daiva come together, after that also some kala, some time has to pass, and then eventually the result comes. So, if we consider these three factors involved, so daivavad thinks that only daiva matters. But if the farmer has not ploughed the land, if the farmer has not sown the seeds, by destiny rains will come. But the rains will not lead to crops growing, the rains will simply lead to weeds growing. You see, why? Because there is no, the karma has not been done. In contrast, if we see that someone may do the farmer may do the karma very well. But after that, if the daiva is not there, the farmer may sow the seed, may plough the land, but if the rains don't come, and again phala will not come. So karmavad is the misconception that our karma determines the results, which is not true. Daivavad is the conception that nothing is in our hands, which is also not true. We have to do our part. Now, in some situations, if we do our work, we do karma, but the daiva is not favorable, the destiny is unfavorable, then we don't get the result. And then we may feel that my karma has gone in vain. All the labor that I did, what did I get by it? I did not get anything. But it's not like that. Remember, our karma, it does two things. If the daiva is favorable, then the karma gives the phala. But even if the daiva is not favorable, our present karma also contributes to our future daiva. And our karma, whatever activity, whatever dutiful activity you are doing right now, that is contributing to our future, our destiny, the stockpile of destiny that is there. And that way, whatever work we do, it never goes in vain. Whatever duty we may do, it may not produce any results in the world's eyes immediately. But no work which is properly done ever goes in vain. And that is an important point for us to understand when we are doing duty. Go ahead. Yeah. So, there's a difference between detachment and irresponsibility. Detachment is basically that we are not obsessed with the work after we have done the work. It is okay, I have given my exam, and after giving the exam, till the results, I am constantly thinking, what is going to be the result? What is going to be the result? What is going to be the result? Don't be emotionally obsessed. You have done your part, now move on to other things. But irresponsibility means I don't study only. So detachment is primarily after the work. Irresponsibility is before the work. So detachment means recognizing that once I have done my karma, there are other factors which will determine the result. So therefore I will not get obsessed with the result. As irresponsibility means I think that I don't have anything to do only. So if we properly understand karma, daiva, kala, how all three lead to phala, then we can be detached without becoming irresponsible. And here it is important that when the scriptures talk about detachment, often they talk about, say, how one should not be attached to one's family, one's children, one's wealth, one's house, all these things. This is important from a transcendental perspective, to focus our attachment on Krishna. But at the same time, if a culture of if the message of detachment is given without understanding a culture of responsibility, then detachment becomes a rationalization for irresponsibility. That means, basically, the idea is that our consciousness, I'll talk about this more in detail, but our consciousness expands through our relationships. Now, if I am all alone, then I don't have to worry about anyone. I can eat whenever I want, I can go wherever I want, I can do whatever I want. Once we start developing relationships, we have to start thinking about other people. And that brings us out of ourselves. We become selfless. And every relationship that we form, if it's a committed relationship, it brings us more and more out of ourselves. Now, if people are stopping this development of oneself at the level of the family, that means, yes, we should be selfless and we should become selfless in the service of a family, but we should go beyond that and ultimately to serve God. But when people are stopping at the level of the family, thinking that's all I need to do, then the Bhagavatam says, go beyond this. Don't stay stuck over there. But somebody who has not come out of oneself only. Now, for that person, that means somebody doesn't even have a basic sense of responsibility. For them, if the message of detachment is given, often they, in the name of becoming detached, they sink more into themselves. They become more self-centered. They actually become irresponsible. So detachment should never be used to rationalize irresponsibility. We all have our duties. And detachment comes from recognizing that there is more to our life than our social responsibilities, our family responsibilities. It is not by thinking that there is less to life than my social responsibilities. There is irresponsibility, there is material responsibility, and there is spiritual responsibility. So what scripture tells us is, don't stay stuck with your material responsibilities alone. Recognize your spiritual responsibilities also. But if people have not even taken up their material responsibilities and they're told become detached, they become detached from this, not to become attached to Krishna, but to become attached to their own selves. They may well become self-centered. And that is very detrimental for one's spiritual growth, and that is also detrimental for social order. If people become more and more selfish, then even materially order can't be maintained. What to speak of spiritually order being maintained? So for example, nowadays people have live-in relationships. They don't even get married. The Bhagavatam says, don't be attached to your family. People today are not attached to their families. But they are not at the level of the Bhagavatam. they are degenerating to the level of animalistic living. Because, of course, there are why people want to have living relationships. That's a whole complex, today's socio-cultural reality is quite complex. But the point is that here people don't want to enter into commitments. And this not wanting to enter into commitments, not wanting to take up responsibilities, this is not detachment. This is, as I told in the morning, Sattva Guna and Tamo Guna look similar, but they are very different. So detachment is in Sattva Guna, irresponsibility is in Tamo Guna. In both cases, people may say that, oh, I'm not concerned. Like once it happened in the temple, there was one devotee who had gone for book distribution, and after distributing books, he just lost all the Lakshmi that he had collected. And then when he came back, he told the temple president that, Prabhuji, I lost all the Lakshmi. What? You lost all the Lakshmi? He said, the devotee was nonchalantly. He says, Prabhu, you don't get so angry, don't get so upset. Krishna has told in the Bhagavad Gita we should be equipoised in gain and loss. Well, yes, Krishna has told that, but if you had lost your own money, would you have been so equipoised? So we all have our attachments, and we may artificially use selective parts of the philosophy to justify our own way of living. So then we can't make spiritual advancement by that. So detachment is important, no doubt, but there is a very significant difference between detachment and irresponsibility. And when we say detachment, that means we are not limited by our worldly relationships. Our scope of consciousness goes beyond those relationships to Krishna. Whereas irresponsibility means we are not expanded even to our worldly relationships. We are caught in ourselves only. And that is not at all conducive for the growth of one's consciousness. And this relates with another similar point, the difference between fruits and goals. The Bhagavad Gita says famously, Karmanye vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. His work, but be detached, but don't be attached to the fruits of the work. Some people say this is completely impractical. How can I do this? Is it that, say, if I'm studying for my exams, should I not think that, oh, I want to do well in my exams, then I'll get good marks, then I'll have a good career? How can we even work? If suppose someone is cooking, should I not think, oh, I should cook nicely? If we don't understand the mood of this verse properly, it can appear entirely impractical. There's a difference between fruits and goals. Now, goals come before we do the work. Fruits come after we have done the work. The Bhagavad Gita is telling us to be detached from fruits, not from goals. Now, we all need to set goals. Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, and Arjuna itself, he was setting goals in the Kurukshetra war. Every day when they would meet at the start of the war, they would set targets. I will do this today, I will do this today, I will do this today. Most famously on the 14th day, when they fought, when Arjuna took a vow, that today I'll kill Jayadratha before sunset. That's a goal. And Krishna did not tell Arjuna, hey, you have forgotten karmanyevadhikaraste. Krishna did not tell that. Krishna assisted Arjuna in fulfilling his goal. So goals help us to concentrate our energy on our actions, to concentrate our focus on our actions. And as I said, the Vedic culture is duty-centered. And so if goals can inspire us to focus on our duty, goals are desirable. We should focus on goals. On the other hand, fruits, that means after I have done something, I think, oh, will I get this or not? Will I get this or not? Will I get this or not? That attachment to the fruits, that distracts us from whatever action we are doing. Say, I have done one activity and I am depending on Daiva and Kala to determine whether the result will come or not. So at that time, now what is the next thing I have to do? Let me focus on that. If I am thinking about that, what I have done and whether the result will come or not, what will happen, then I am distracted from what I can do right now. So in that sense, the detachment, we have to be detached from the goals. We have to be detached from the fruits. That doesn't mean that we should not set the goals. The focus is on, there is a human element. Prabhupada writes on the first canto purport, that when things go wrong by factors beyond human control, then there is nothing to lament. That means we have done our part, and even after doing our part, things have gone wrong. Then there is nothing to lament for us, because we have done our part. If we have not done our part only, then definitely that is something wrong and we should lament. Go ahead. Yeah. So what is the exact import of karmanyevadhikaraste? See, our work is not the sole producer or cause of a linearly produced result. That means it is not that I do the work and I get the result. It's not as simple as that. So many factors beyond our own work, they contribute to the result. So life works often in subtle ways. A child may be hungry and child may go, there's an orchard over there. He goes to the orchard and sees there is an apple tree. The child shakes the apple tree and looking, oh, when will I get an apple? Now, no apple falls, but from a neighboring tree, a mango falls. But the child is so caught in looking at the apple and looking for the apple, the child doesn't see the mango only. So like this, what happens in our life is that often, if we are too caught with getting a particular result, with seeking a particular result, then Krishna may answer our prayers, but his answers may not be exactly what we expect. And if we are too caught, too attached to the results, then we are not open to his answers. When we pray to Krishna, actually, if we get time, I'll talk more about prayers, but just one point about prayers here, that when we pray, there is an implicit understanding that we accept God's power. God is very powerful. Krishna is omnipotent. So he has the power to do what I can't do. And therefore we are praying to him to give us a particular result, to do for us something which we are not able to do. That is good. At the same time, we also can consider this point that not only is Krishna's power greater than us, but Krishna's intelligence is also greater than us. So when we pray to Krishna that you please arrange for this to happen, you please give me this result, Basically, that when we are saying, Krishna, let's form a partnership, my intelligence and your power. But Krishna doesn't always work like that. We are basically, when we set conditional prayers, Krishna, please give this, then we are half trusting Krishna. We are trusting his intelligence, but we are not trusting his power, but not his intelligence. Krishna is omnipotent and Krishna is also omniscient. So when we pray to Krishna, then yes, we can pray, Krishna, this is the problem I am having and this is what I feel is the best solution. But whatever happens, please give me the strength to serve you. Please give me the intelligence how I can serve you. When Prabhupada was asked, what is the best prayer that we can offer to Krishna? He said, please give me the strength to serve you. That is the best prayer Prabhupada said. Please give me the strength to serve you. Strength, of course, there means the determination, the intelligence, the capacity to continue serving Krishna. So when we work in our life, at that time, we have certain problems and we are doing our duty. But while doing our duty, sometimes things may not work out the way we want them to. And if we are too attached to a particular result, then not getting the result on our terms can agitate us so much that the result may come out on some other terms and we'll not be open to that only. So I'll conclude with a story. Another story from the Mahabharata. Most of us know the story of how Duryodhana manipulated Durvasa Muni to go to the Pandavas when they were in the forest. And he told them, go in the noon after Draupadi. He did not tell after Draupadi had lunch, but that was his plan. So the Akshay Patra would not give any food after Draupadi had eaten. And that was the time when Durvasa Muni came. And when Durvasa Muni came, Yudhishthira was filled with anxiety. What to do now? And then Durvasa Muni came with hundreds of thousands of disciples. And then he said that I will take lunch, but first I will go and take bath. And as he went to take bath, Yudhishthira turned towards Draupadi, what to do? So Draupadi says, actually, I have already eaten. I don't know. She says, let's pray to Krishna. And she prayed desperately to Krishna. And she, Krishna, please help us, please help us so that we can serve the sages. So when Draupadi prayed, like Krishna came over there. And Krishna told Draupadi, I'm very hungry. Please give me some food. It's like Draupadi was asking for an apple to fall down and a big stone fell on her head. It's one thing that I'm not able to feed the sages. It's such a terrible thing that I'm not able to feed my Lord also. So it seems that Draupadi's problems increased by her prayer to Krishna. She says, Krishna, please don't make fun of me. He says, I called you because we don't have any food and we need help. So Krishna told Draupadi that just go and check. You have that Akshay Patra. See if something is there over there. And then he went over there and she went over there, she saw there was one morsel of grain. And Krishna, there is nothing. Nothing, it's just one morsel. It cannot feed anyone. Just give me that morsel. And Krishna took that one morsel and he ate it. And as soon as he ate it, he said, I'm fully satisfied. Not only was he fully satisfied, suddenly all the sages who were bathing in the forest, they started up blurping. What happened? Hey, we are full. And they felt alarmed. Because, if we ask someone, I'm coming for your house for lunch, and then we don't go only. It's at the very least, very disrespectful. And they thought, what should we do? So they all look at each other, and Durvasa Muni says, Yad gatva nanivartante. Just went away from there. Now, interestingly normally here, the focus of the story is on how, by satisfying Krishna, everyone gets satisfied. That is definitely one important lesson from the story. But there are several other points. See, Draupadi was a well-trained, careful housewife. How did she leave one morsel of grain on that Akshay Patra? The Akshay Patra is also not like some ordinary vessel. Sometimes we may have some ordinary cups and plates which may not clean. But if we have a golden plate, which we use only on special occasions, which is very treasured for us, we won't leave any morsels over there. So how did this morsel of grain stay over there? Draupadi herself did not expect it to be there. She thought, it's already over. So apparently the way it is that day Draupadi overlooked cleaning it properly, or whoever she had entrusted to clean. They didn't clean it properly. So it was apparently a mistake. But Krishna is so expert that even through our mistakes, he can bring out good for us. So Krishna used Draupadi's apparent mistake in not cleaning the pot properly, the plate properly. He used it to solve her problem. But the important point is Draupadi was open to Krishna's plan. When Krishna told Draupadi, go and see if something is there in the Akshaya Patra, Draupadi did not insist, nothing is there. She had asked for food, Krishna did not give food directly. But Krishna arranged to fulfill her needs in some other way. That's why we may shake an apple tree and a mango may fall down. That means our prayers may be answered in ways that we do not expect. And that is where, if our attachment is to the fruits, then we will not see the other answer, the other ways in which our prayer is answered. If we are doing our work and if we are focused only on one particular fruit, certainly we should have goals and we should focus on our goals. But after we've done our work, if we're just too caught in the result, in a particular way only, then if Krishna answers in a different way, we will be close to that. That's why when Krishna says, be detached from the fruits, that is at the second chapter he says, he's talking about Karma Yoga. But as the Bhagavad Gita flows forward, this Karmanyavadikaraste comes in 2.47. But later on, as we see, the Gita's flow moves forward. Krishna says that offer the fruits of your work to me. Yat karoshi dashnasi yat juhosi dadasi yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva madarpanam. 9.27 he says, whatever work you do, Krishna is not just saying be detached from the work. Krishna says, offer the fruits of that work to me. That means essentially become attached to me. Mat parama. Mat karma krun mat paramo mat bhaktah sanga varjita nirvairah sarva bhuteshu yah samameti pandava. He says, do my work, making me the goal of your life. So at one level, we can develop by understanding that I alone do not produce the results. With that philosophical knowledge, we can develop detachment from the results. And that is also good. But the Bhagavad Gita's message goes further. Our focus is that we want to be detached from the fruits so that we can be attached to Krishna. Our goal is not just to be detached from the fruits. Our goal is to be attached to Krishna. And when we are attached to Krishna, then whatever way Krishna answers our prayers, whatever way Krishna responds to our efforts, we will be open to that. So this was actually Srila Prabhupada's speciality. Just go ahead. I think one more slide is there here. Yeah. So spiritual knowledge is actually empowering. How does it empower? It keeps our focus on that which is in our control. That is our efforts. So John F. Kennedy, he was president of America, and he famously said, ask not what the nation has done for you, ask what you have done for the nation. So we live in a culture which is very entitlement centered. We think, I'm entitled to this, I'm entitled to that, I'm entitled to that. Especially, the parents are well-to-do. When the children grow up, children often develop an entitlement complex. I should have this toy, I should have this gadget, I should have that, I should have that. And when we have that entitlement mentality, then when things don't go our way, we just can't take it. And there will be in our lives, things will not go our way. So if our focus is not on what we are getting, but on what we are doing. What we are getting is not in our control. But what we are doing is in our control. So when we understand properly the interrelationship of how karma, daiva, kala, all of them together produce phala, in this we understand what is in my control is my karma. And if we can focus on the karma and we can use our knowledge of daiva to increase our focus on karma, then we can actually put in our best efforts. Because if you are always distracted, if I do this, will the result come? Will the result not come? Should I do this? Should I not do this? We just get caught in that internal dissipation of our energy. So when we have proper philosophical knowledge, then we focus on that which is in our control. Go ahead. And I think one more slide. Same thing. Yeah. So there are two ways in which karmavad can lead to frustration. One is, if karmavad basically means we are the determiners of our result. We are the controllers and we can produce the results. So when the results don't come out, then either we blame others, because of you it didn't work out. Because of you it didn't work out. And people can become snappy, people can become vicious, people can become malicious, because they think that I deserved the result, I did the work, but they didn't help me. They came in the way. And we start blaming others too much. The other extreme is, if we don't blame others, we blame ourselves only. I am good for nothing. I am useless. And nowadays, often psychology is psychiatric treatment, psychological treatment, they are also big business. So what happens? People have anxiety. And we live in such a society where everybody has anxiety. The life is like that. But then if you go to a psychiatrist, they say, oh, you have got a social anxiety disorder. What is that? That's simply anxiety. We feel inadequate. Hey, am I good enough? We live in such a competitive world that everybody at different times they feel inadequate. What do you have? You've got an inferiority complex. So what should I do about it? Oh, come to my counseling sessions. Pay something like $100, $500, $1,000 for every session. It's all, yes, in some cases, people may have severe brain disorder problems. If there's a chemical imbalance in the brain, at that time, definitely one may need medical intervention. But if we start looking for humans, for chemical solutions to human problems, anxiety, feeling of inadequacy, this is a human problem. Being a human being itself means that we are not God. And that's why we'll be often put in situations where we feel I'm not adequate enough to deal with the situation. So that is a problem which we need to solve by recognizing our position. We are not the controllers. So when we think I am the controller, and when we find that I'm not able to control, either I lash out at those who are not allowing me to control, or I beat myself up. And we end up developing many kinds of complexes. But if we understand properly, there is something in my control and there is something beyond my control. So let me focus on that which is in my control, and let me leave that which is not in my control in Krishna's hands. So Krishna will give us the results in his terms, which will often be better than what we would have expected, what we could have planned. Srila Prabhupada said that, is it remaining something remaining there? Yeah. So actually, Srila Prabhupada, if he had been thinking in terms of work and results, nobody could have withstood the kind of reversal that he faced throughout his life. Tried to start a business, the business collapsed. Tried to start another business, one of his employees stole the money and went away. He tried to start a spiritual organization, the very place, the League of Devotees which started in Jhansi, the very place which was going to be his international headquarters, he was practically evicted from there. He tried to start a magazine and tried to distribute it. What happened? A cow came and gored into him and knocked him down. Another time a sunstroke made him unconscious. So that time in Delhi, when Prabhupada fell unconscious, that year actually, if you look back at history, several hundred people died because of sunstroke. It was extreme heat in that year. And Srila Prabhupada went on. They tried to help his god brothers in their magazine. They did not allow him to expand the magazine, although they wanted to. He tried to go to America, he got a heart attack. Finally, he came to America and his tape recorder was stolen. Finally, he started preaching and some young people started coming. The first young person who said, I want to become your disciple, he himself went mad because of drugs and attacked Prabhupada. And Prabhupada had to run out of the place where he was staying, run for his life. After going through all these obstacles, how did Prabhupada continue on? Because he was able to continue because his eyes were fixed on Krishna. He didn't, if he had thought that his success was being successful in the world's eyes, then all the repeated failures in the world's eyes would have destroyed his determination. It was not that he did not want to be successful in the world's eyes. He certainly wanted Krishna's glory to manifest in this world. But for him, his primary success was that whether he was serving Krishna or not. One time, one of his Mataji disciples wrote to him, she says, I have so many problems with my god brothers and god sisters. I can't just work with them. I'm feeling so discouraged. So Prabhupada wrote back, there is no reason to be discouraged in Krishna's service because we are working on a different platform. Our platform is whether we are pleasing Krishna or not. So we focus on Krishna and we strive to please Krishna. So even when Srila Prabhupada was just a lonely figure walking on the streets of New York, unknown to practically anyone, even at that time he was successful. Because he was still serving Krishna, still chanting Krishna's name, still speaking, recording his, writing his Bhagavatam, still talking about Krishna to whoever came to meet him. And Krishna in his own time worked out amazingly how Prabhupada later in 1977 said that actually I got my success exceeded my expectations. He said, I dreamt that there would be temples and there would be devotees, but the sheer number of devotees, the sheer number of temples that were established, it's astonishing. So if we focus on Krishna and strive to please Krishna, then we will not be discouraged when we don't get results in this world. We'll be able to focus on enthusiastically, and in Krishna's time, he will provide us wonderful results. So I'll summarize. Started by talking about how whether, you can go back to the first slide. We discussed about karma, daiva, and dharma. That was our topic. So, go ahead. Yeah, we discussed about how Ram very gracefully accepted Dashrath's sentence. And when Lakshman said that we should not accept injustice as destiny, Ram said, I'm concerned not about destiny, but about what is my duty. And that, my father gave me this instruction, that Kaikeyi's love, Kaikeyi, despite having so much love for me, spoke like this. All this couldn't have happened without the will of destiny. So his focus was not on destiny, his focus was on his duty. And he talked about destiny so that he could muster his determination to do an unexpectedly challenging duty that was thrust on him. He was expected to become the king, but suddenly he was told to go to the forest. This must be the will of destiny. So he took that up because of his commitment to duty. And then we discussed how, although he was committed, go ahead, that he did not mean that he was not fatalist in the sense of thinking that nothing is in my control. When Sita was abducted, he immediately fought vigorously, although he had no resources to fight. Because his focus on, first case, what was his duty to his father? Second case, what was his duty to his wife? His focus was always duty-centered, not destiny-centered. And we see that the same philosophical knowledge, if it discourages from destiny, we do not consider it that way. So Vasudeva did not think that if Devki's death is destined, what am I doing trying to save her? No, he considered, what is my duty? It is to protect my wife. And therefore, I will use all possible means, including philosophical arguments centered on destiny. So philosophical knowledge also should be used to increase our commitment to our duty, to what we can do right now. And Kamsa was going away from his duty. That's why Vasudeva reminded him of his duty. Then we discussed about how, when we talk about destiny, how is it related with karma? So karma can mean action, reaction, system of action, reaction, and one category of action, that is good action. So the reactions that we get to our karma, they comprise our destiny. And in that sense, our destiny is also been created by us, and our future destiny is created by us through our present actions. So destiny on one side should not be used to give up our duty, and certainly destiny should not be used ever to blame those who are suffering, those who have been victimized. The point is that destiny is meant to inspire us to do our duty, not to give up our duty. And then we discussed in that connection elaborately about how work produces results. So karma plus daiva plus kala produces phala. Just like a farmer sowing the seeds is the karma, the rains coming on time is the daiva, then the passage of the time till the crops grow into harvest, that is the kala, and then phala comes along. So in this, people may go to various extremes. So those who think that everything is in my hands, they think karma is supreme. So that is misunderstanding, because sometimes despite our best efforts, results may cannot come. And on the other extreme is of the pendulum, the daiva is supreme. That is also wrong, because daiva, even if it is favorable, if we don't do our work, again result won't come. And it says that if somebody uses daiva to give up karma, then that is irresponsibility. Destiny determines the consequences of our actions, not our actions themselves. That's what Vidura tells Dhritarashtra. And then in this connection, we discussed about the difference between consequences of action. That two things, that irresponsibility means that we don't do our actions only, which is wrong. Detachment means after we have done our actions, we don't keep obsessing over the results. That way we stay focused on whatever next actions we have to do. So same way, we should be detached from the fruits of our work, but we should not be apathetic about setting goals. Because goals enable us to focus on our actions. And Arjuna set goals all the time. And we discussed in this connection from the Mahabharata about how Krishna is not destiny, he is the Lord of destiny. I discussed the Dronacharya's incident in detail. So Krishna is the Lord of destiny and he can orchestrate destiny in ways that we may not expect, that we cannot work it out. And that connection we discussed. Go ahead. Yeah. So when Krishna says karmanyevadhikaraste, what that means is, it's not that work A produces the result B. There is not necessarily simply a linear cause effect. There are other factors involved, and Krishna can orchestrate those factors in different ways. So, we may shake an apple tree and we may get a mango, but we have to be open to see that my hunger is being fulfilled by that mango. So similarly, we see that Draupadi prayed to Krishna for food. Krishna did not give food, but Krishna orchestrated things in such a way that her apparent mistake in leaving a morsel of grain, through that, her need for food was satisfied. So like if we are too attached to the fruit or to a particular fruit, then we are no longer open to Krishna's plan. But so Bhakti talks not just about, Karma Yoga talks about detachment from fruits, whereas Bhakti talks not just about detachment from fruits, it talks about attachment to Krishna. When we are attached to Krishna, then whatever plan Krishna works out, we will be open to that. Go ahead. And the spiritual knowledge of this whole interaction of karma, daiva and phala, it is empowering because it enables us to focus on that which is in our control, our own actions. If we think that the results are determined by us, then if the results don't come, then we go, then we demand that the results come and we develop an entitlement mentality. And when the results don't come, we become, as I said, go ahead, we become either externally, we be malicious towards others whom we feel are interrupting with our results, or internally, we become depressed, we become pessimistic, we develop inferiority complex. All this happens because we don't understand our position properly. But if you understand that there is something in my hands and there is something outside my hands, and we focus on that which is in our hands and leave the rest in Krishna's hands, then we can actually act as enthusiastically and as productively as is possible for us in this world. So thank you very much. Hare Krishna.